So one of my favorite things about this podcast is that it gives me the opportunity to dig into topics that I find personally interesting, and I get to do it and have you guys listen along at the same time. And one of my favorite ways to find topics for the show is to look into the areas of the homesteading world or the old-fashioned living world that haven't been covered a lot. I like to dig into those things that have a little bit of information floating around the internet, but you can't really get the good, meaty information as easily. And today's topic absolutely fits into that bucket. It's a topic I've been interested in for years, but it's been a little tricky to find really reputable advice. And the topic is, drumroll please, herbalism and animals. So, I have a lot of animals. I don't even know how many at this point. I've lost count. And I'm always looking for ways to help my care of them be more holistic, more natural, more common sense. But it's really hard to sort through that information sometimes. So today I am very excited to be joined by Dr. Jones. He is a practicing veterinarian, a traditional naturopath, and clinical herbalist. So that's a combination you don't see a lot of, and that's why I am so excited for this conversation. For many years, he's seen the power of herbs bless the lives of his veterinary patients and his human clients. So he has some incredible resources, homegrownherbalist.net. He has an herbalism school. We're going to get into all of that today. But Dr. Jones, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here, Jill. I look forward to visiting with you. It's a fun topic.
It is. And I just don't feel like there's a lot of information, at least not as much as there is around other topics. So I think it's a hole in the knowledge base, and I'm excited to do a little bit to help fill that today with my audience.
Yeah.
So is this something from your perspective? Obviously, you have much more familiarity with the topic than I do. Is this something that has just not been addressed as much? Am I just not looking in the right areas? Like, why do we see kind of that void with herbalism and animals? I mean, it's starting to pick up with humans. It feels like a bit more, but sometimes I feel like we're just forgetting that side of the world with our four-legged friends.
Yeah. There's not a lot of stuff in this modern time. Ironically, historically, there's mountains of stuff. I mean, some of the oldest documents written that we have actual copies of from China, from India, even European stuff that's thousands of years old, was way more heavily based on animal and veterinary applications of herbs than it was on human herbs. So I guess, if your kid died, that was sad. You could make another one, but if your cow died, everyone died,
Yeah, right, yeah.
So
priorities, I guess, yeah.
I think a lot of herbal medicine actually sprang from its use originally in veterinary applications. So, but yeah, There's not a lot of resources currently, which is too bad because they really are extraordinarily effective. I mean, I used them all day, every day for decades in my veterinary practice. And in many cases had way better outcomes than I would have had if I was just using pharmaceuticals. Fascinating.
Now, was your practice large animal, small animal, mixture?
Yeah, I did everything.
Everything, okay.
I've done literally everything. Did a lot of, early on, I was doing a truly mixed practice. So I was doing, cow, calf, beef operations, dairies, swine operations, poultry operations, as well as, dogs and cats. And then I got a little more focused on dairy stuff. But was still doing dogs and cats at the same time.
Okay.
And then the last few years of my practice, I just did dogs and cats. I tore up my shoulder pretty good and got retired from wrestling cows all days. But
that's a hard career.
Really
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have so many questions. I guess just right off the bat, I'm curious, is there species or a species that is easier to use herbs with, or one that's harder, or is it kind of the same across the board once you know the principles?
It really is very similar across the board. You do have, and I'll make one caveat there, you have to be very careful using antibiotic herbs in rabbits, or any antibiotic in rabbits, because their gut flora is so critical to their survival that if you beat them up, they really can be in trouble in a hurry. But even then, the herbal antibiotics are safer than the pharmaceutical antibiotics. But other than that, it really is so similar. people always ask me, yeah, but what do I do with my dog? Yeah, but what do I do for my chicken? And honestly, you do the same thing you do for your kid or your grandma. There's really very little difference. Some of the delivery systems are different for getting them in. But as far as safety, there's a few very specific examples of this plant or that plant. Hops in high levels can be a little dangerous for dogs and cats. Garlic in high and long-term levels can be dangerous for dogs and cats. But, I can count on one hand the herbs I worry about with other species.
Okay.
Most of the danger, most of the risk comes from dosing, because a 2-pound Chihuahua needs way less herb than a 200-pound human, and so the highest risk, the highest thing, and it's not even a risk if you think about it at all, but the thing you have to think most about is, okay, I have to think like a 2-pound dosing instead of a 200-pound dosing. But, other than that, it's very, very similar.
Okay. In terms of just how an herbal treatment will work with the body, animal or human body, versus a conventional pharmaceutical. I know in the little bit I've dabbled with essential oils or things like that, herbs, I think sometimes people like me, we come into it with this Western medicine perspective where I take a pill once every 6 hours and I know I will get a result, in this specified amount of time.
Right.
In my experience, herbs are a little bit different. And is that your experience as well? Would you agree with that statement, or is that just a misunderstanding on our part?
No, well, it depends on the herb. Some herbs have a very immediate effect, and do things. I guess there's two big categories of two big groupings, you could say, of times that we use herbs. One would be for very acute things. I'm having an asthma attack, and so I take some, bronchodilating herbs, gumweed, lobelia, cramp bark, those kinds of guys. And that's going to be an immediate effect. It's going to open things up. But for things that involve, for example, infectious disease things, what I say, sort of the drum that I beat in the homegrown herbalist school, is that you should use herbs early, often, and after.
Okay.
So if you're fighting a bug, don't wait till you're good and sick to start taking those herbs. Get on it right now. And so that's the early. The often is don't just do it twice a day. You should probably be doing it. If you're fighting an infectious process, you should probably do it every 3 or 4 hours, And then the after is keep taking them for a couple of days after you feel better, so you don't crash again. Keep giving your body the resources it's using and appreciating to keep get the job finished. So that early, often, and after principle, I think, is a really, really fundamental cornerstone to being successful with herbal medicine.
Yeah, and I've heard other herbalists echo that. It just feels like, a little bit, maybe more, the frequency is key there versus your typical pharmaceuticals. That makes sense. Okay.
Well, and get ahead of the curve.
Yes.
My wife, just as an example, my wife got COVID, I don't know, a year or two ago. I don't even remember, back in the good old days when COVID was running around crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But, she started getting a little sick. And so I started taking herbs, right?
Yes.
I said, you should take some herbs. And she said, I should. And she didn't. And the next day she was a little sicker. And I'm still taking my herbs, right? I'm not sick at all. And I said, hon, you should take some herbs. You want me to get some herbs? No, I'll get to that. And, she's a Idaho farm girl. So she's out working and doing things, too busy to take care of herself. Well, day 3, she's really in trouble. We got a little test. Sure enough, she's positive, and, the next day I was sick, but I was only sick for like a day or two. And she was sick for a couple of weeks because I'd been ahead of the game for 3 days, And so taking herbs early on for any kind of viral or bacterial thing, boy, if you even think you're getting sick, get going on the herbs and knock it out before it gets a hold of you.
Absolutely. Well, that brings me to a question, maybe not so much for animals. Well, maybe for animals too, but I know certain herbs, at least I've heard, and maybe this is incorrect, but if you take them repeatedly over a long period of time, they can lose their potency in your body. So are there herbs that you take on it as a daily supplement, or are you just keeping them in your arsenal? Like you said, if you feel like you've been exposed to something, you feel like you're coming down with something. How do you work through that?
Well, there are basically what you would call tonic, nutritive kinds of herbs that you can take a lot. Throwing a spoonful of burdock powder in your smoothie and a spoonful of nettle leaf. That's just the best thing in the world you can do for yourself.
Okay.
Feeds you, resolves all kinds of low-grade issues. It's just, really good for you. It supports your liver and your kidneys, and everybody's happy. Versus, I'm not going to take an immune support formula all the time, because that really can become taxing to the body and it gets less effective. I tell people, the rule of thumb I tell people for humans or animals, if you're on something long-term, if you're taking anti-inflammatories all the time because you got arthritis, I don't have a problem with that. If you're taking digestive stuff all the time, there's certain digestive things that are just good maintenance tonic things. But what I tell people is to take a day off every week or two, just give your body a break to kind of regroup. And then when you come back to it, things seem to work better. Anything that's real taxing, ginsengs are wonderful herbs, but they're very demanding. They require a lot of resources from the body to do all the things that herb's telling you to do.
Sure.
And so, I say take 2 or 3 days off on that one, and like I said, again, especially immune stimulating herbs, I'm not going to take those long term. That's not something you take long term anyway, so. Right.
That makes sense. Can you get resistance to an herbal antibiotic like you may get resistance with a pharmaceutical antibiotic?
It's way harder, Joe, because they're so much more complicated.
Okay.
Yes. Penicillin has one chemical in it. Amoxicillin has one chemical in it. Barberry has a dozen. And so it's sort of like if somebody came to my house every day and whacked me with a stick, wouldn't take me very long to figure out how not to get whacked with that stick.
Sure.
But if he came with a stick and a gun and a flamethrower and a half dozen other things,
it's a little trickier.
It's pretty tough to get resistant to that. Sure. I've had a lot of cases over the years where nothing pharmaceutical was touching an infection. And I put them on an immune stimulant and something like barberry or calendula, and it just knocks it out.
Okay.
Because they're so much more complicated, so much more diverse in their approach to killing the bug, number one. And number two, the body is way better at using plants than it is at using drugs.
Shocking.
Weird. It's almost like we've been eating them for a really long time.
Yeah. I thought. Yeah. I'm interrupting this episode for just a second to tell you about a homesteading event that may be near you. And if it is, you definitely gotta go. It's the second annual Modern Homestead Conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And before I tell you more, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that I can't attend, and I am so bummed. I just couldn't make the dates work this year. But the good news is there are a ton of other amazing speakers and experts that you are going to learn so much from. Joel Salatin will be there. Lisa from Farmhouse on Boone, she's been here on my podcast. Homesteading Family, Sally Fallon, Jess from Roots and Refuge, and tons more. They'll also have Dr. Temple Grandin doing a very special talk this year. I got to see her last year, and she was amazing. So this 2-day event features presentations for both beginner and advanced homesteaders. There's topics like food preservation, seed saving, animal husbandry and processing, fire and homestead preparedness, herbalism, how to build a strong community, and that is just scratching the surface. So if you've never attended an event like this, trust me, it's really worth it to make some time and go. You're going to see these things in real life, in person, which will fast track your learning so much more. Plus, there's just nothing like getting to rub shoulders with people who are like-minded and doing all the weird and crazy things that you and I like to do. So get your tickets now. They're still for sale, and you can grab them over at modernhomesteading.com. Fascinating. Okay, I have a whole bunch of questions I've been writing down. I'm just going to start at the top of the list. You mentioned delivery system, and in terms of how you're getting herbs into a body, an animal body or human body. what does that look like for animals? Because I mean, I'm familiar with humans, tinctures and all those things. We have salves. Is that what you're following that same path with animals, or is there some that are better than others?
Yeah, you can. Anything that you can use on a human to get herbs into them, you could use on an animal. But there's no reason to a lot of times.
Okay.
So basically, it doesn't matter at all, for the most part, how you get herbs into your body. Just like it doesn't matter how you get to work. Take a helicopter, ride a camel, ride your bike. You'll get there, you start doing your job, right? And so you can take powders, throw them in your smoothie. You can make a tea. You can make a tincture. You can put them in capsules. There's all kinds of ways to get them into your body. With humans, you'll have better compliance if you're using tinctures and teas, because not everybody can choke down those powders.
Yeah.
But with animals, I used almost exclusively powders, unless I was doing something that was a time-sensitive emergency thing. If I'm giving cayenne for a dog in shock, which is the best thing in the world to do for a dog in shock, I want that working right now. If I'm using lobelia for an asthma attack, I don't want to spend 15 minutes making a tea. I want to use a tincture, so it's working right now.
Yeah.
But otherwise, for animals, I almost always used powders, and I would just give them the dry powder. And if it was a dog or a cat, mix it with a little wet food. If it was a horse or a cow or a chicken, throw it in the feed and down it goes,
Okay.
Sometimes if I wanted to make sure they got the dose, I'd put the powder in a big old syringe, like a catheter tip syringe, dosing syringe, mix it with some water and shoot it in them,
Sure.
But for the most part, especially dogs and cats, I just mix the powders with the food, with wet food, just so it sticks. Cats can be a little fussy, and so sometimes I do use a tincture in a cat because you can't get them to eat the powder.
Sure.
But dogs are dummies, Once in a while you get a little Pomeranian doesn't think it's food, But
yeah, the rest of them are just like
Labradors.
I'll eat anything. I'll even bad things. Yep. That's how mine are. Yeah.
So,
okay. You mentioned the importance of dosing. How can the average person like me get to the point where we know how to dose, feel comfortable with dosing? I know you have your resources. Like, is that the best place to go? What do you kind of suggest so we can learn that?
Well, if you don't want to remember anything, you can go to homegrownherbalist.net, and every product page, there's a little tab that says info and dosing. And there's dosages for everything from a Chihuahua to a draft horse, or a human. We're kind of in between those two extremes.
Yeah.
But, just as a general rule, if you're using powdered herbs, which is what I'm usually using on animals, if it's a big dog, dose him like a human. Give him a teaspoon per dose, of dry powdered herb. And I don't mean like a level, carefully measured teaspoon. I just mean a spoonful of stuff.
Yeah.
If he's a 30 or 40 pound dog, do a half of that and just go down from there. A really tiny little dog is going to get an eighth of a teaspoon. A great big dog a really big dog might get 2 if he's like a St. Bernard,
Yep.
But a normal big dog is going to get a teaspoon, and just kind of go between there, just a half a teaspoon dog or a quarter teaspoon dog. The margins of safety are really wide on herbs. I can count on one hand the time that I had any issue with herbs having side effects, and it was usually because they were being combined with a pharmaceutical.
Yes.
Which is another important point. Don't take herbs with pharmaceuticals unless you know what you're doing. And don't take them if you're pregnant or you're nursing, or if your animal is pregnant or nursing, unless you know that herb is safe. Because some of them aren't safe for pregnancy. And some of them, even though they're perfectly safe for mom, are very dangerous to the baby who's nursing. And so you have to have some information there. But other than that, other than drugs, pregnancy, and nursing, safety margins are really wide for the most part.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. I'm just thinking, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of a rundown of some of the common ailments that you see most in farm animals. Because my audience, we have a lot of chickens, we have cattle, we have some hogs. Sure. What are some of the big issues that you see, and how do you like to treat those issues with herbs?
Okay. Well,
it's a big, broad question, sort of. So take it where you want to take it.
Maybe to go to school for 8 years, you'd know that. So.
Exactly. I know. Just go to school. Duh.
Yeah. No, that's silly too. But they didn't teach me any herb stuff in veterinary school.
Right. I'm sure they didn't.
Anyway, well, I don't know, just like, well, let's look at scours. Diarrhea.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yes.
If you've got a calf with scours, or you got pigs with scours, or a brother-in-law with scours, whatever it is, that's something that herbs can be really, really effective at helping. And there's basically two kinds of actions that I use for that. One is I use astringent herbs that dry things up. And the other thing I use, well, three, I guess. So I use astringent things, like sage is probably my favorite one. Really, really good for scours. The other thing that's really good for scours are herbs that calm the muscles of the gut, because that's why you have diarrhea. It's because the guts are hyperactive. Water's not getting reabsorbed, right? And so herbs that are the best herb in the world for that is angelica seed. I love angelica seed for that. But any of the mints are good too. They calm the gut nerves. Chamomile is good for that, calms the gut. Just to relax those muscles so things can hang around long enough to get some water pulled out.
Okay.
And then there's antibiotic herbs too. You can use barberry or hops or things like that, Oregon grape, if it's a bacterial enteritis, But the main thing is to slow it down so that you're not, because the primary risk to that animal is not the bug. Usually it's dehydration.
Yes.
That's what's going to kill them.
Yes.
Sometimes the bugs are a big deal too. E. coli and things can be a big deal too. But, and honestly, Jill, the most important thing, I was a consultant for big dairies and big swine operations and stuff. And, the most important thing to do is hygiene. If that calf was not born with massive amounts of E. coli in its gut.
Yeah.
So what happened? Well, he's got nowhere clean to sleep,
Yeah.
And having things clean in the calving area, in the farrowing area, really important to have that be a clean place, lots of clean straw. And the other thing for respiratory infections, same thing, ventilation, make sure there's good airflow and good air movement, and you'll have way less disease. It's way better to prevent the thing from happening in the first place than to try and fix it later,
Yes, absolutely.
So that's sort of a drum we can beat too, is how to keep things
right.
Keep the bugs out of them in the first place.
Right. And I think that that's what I like about some of the more sustainable regenerative ag is they're looking at, okay, how do we not make the better drugs? How do we just not have to have this issue be an issue in the first place? Which is, I think it's like so many, a multi-pronged approach to all of this. It's just more than one piece.
They've done studies on the flora, the bacterial flora of cow guts. And when you confine them and feed them tons of, high carbohydrate corn and stuff to fatten them up on a feedlot, the E. coli levels go through the roof.
Yes.
But if they're out on pasture, they don't.
Yep.
Same thing with chickens. Yep. Chickens that live on pasture have very little E. coli. If you want to watch something hysterical, go to YouTube and find an old Julia Child video of her preparing chickens to eat. And if we did that the way she did it today, we'd all die.
Yeah, right. Yes.
But her chickens were coming off a farm where they were puttering around until it was time to harvest them.
Yeah.
And the E. coli risk was almost zero for her.
Yeah.
So
it's fascinating.
Something else to think about.
Yes, so many things. How about mastitis on a milk cow? What would you do?
So mastitis, there's two big categories of mastitis. And we could talk about mastitis a lot. In fact, I used to get paid a lot of money to talk a lot about mastitis.
Cool.
There's two, as a consultant. There's contagious mastitis, and there's environmental mastitis. Okay. So environmental mastitis is, you milk the cow, and while her teat canals are still open, or if your milking machines are too powerful and they've sucked out the ends a tiny bit, and she lays in a sloppy pen, she gets bacteria entering the udder, and now you've got an E. coli mastitis or Salmonella Klebsiella. There's different bugs that can do it. Those organisms make a really severe mastitis. I mean, that bag is hard as a rock, and that cow's got a high fever, and she's really sick and really in trouble. Ironically, oftentimes by the time she looks really bad, all the bugs are dead.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so the main thing with her at that point is the toxins that the dying bacteria have released. E. coli is like a grenade, doesn't bother you very much till you kill it, and then it releases all kinds of endotoxins. And that's what's causing all that inflammation stuff. And so the most important thing to do with that gal is to milk, and get all that stuff out of her. In fact, some people, in the old days, they put a calf on her.
Yes.
And the calf doesn't get the stuff from the milk, the infection, because like I said, the bugs are mostly dead.
Yeah, sure.
But that constant milking, massaging the udder, things like that. But you can also use, anti-inflammatory herbs, like burdock, like turmeric, like, yucca, things like that can help with the inflammation. You can use antibiotic herbs if you think there's something going on. There's no reason not to,
Mm-hmm.
So again, herbs like barberry, Oregon grape, calendula, echinacea for immune stimulation. The same things you would do if you had a bacterial infection.
Okay.
You can also do comfrey. You can put comfrey tincture in a little propylene glycol and inject that into the udder, and sometimes that has some nice anti-inflammatory effects. But mostly we're trying to get that stuff out. The other critical thing is to get her drinking a lot of water, and so, one of the first thing I would do when I had a cow that had a severe, environmental mastitis, I'd give them hypertonic saline IV, just extra salty salt water.
Okay.
And it would make her real thirsty, and she'd walk over the trough and drink 20 gallons of water. So, getting fluid into her is really important too. So that's environmental mastitis. Contagious mastitis is bugs that are, bacteria that are parasites to the udder, and they get transmitted by poor milking practices.
Okay.
Like the guy's using the same washcloth to clean all the udders, or he's not keeping his hands clean, or he's getting milk all over his hands and not hosing them off before he goes to the next cow. Those organisms are, the big ones are Staph aureus and Streptococcus agalacti. And so those are actually transmissible through poor milking technique. And so again, prevention is the key. It's a really good idea if you ever get a mastitis case to get the milk cultured and see what the bug is. Because if it's Staph aureus or strep, milk her last.
Sure.
Don't milk her at the beginning and then put that machine on everybody else. Milk her last. And so those organisms, strep is easy to kill. It's it just lives in the milk, and you can use antibiotic herbs and immune stimulating herbs and kill that one. Staph is harder because staph makes little micro abscesses in the tissue.
Yeah.
And you can clean it up, but next week when she gets stressed, the little abscesses break, and it's really, really hard to get antibiotics, whether they're herbs or drugs, into little abscesses, because that's the whole point of an abscess, is to keep stuff away from it,
Right.
And so again, immune stimulating herbs, antibiotic herbs. I have a formula called Immune Support. I have a formula called Bug Buster. Go look at those and look at the plants in those.
Okay.
And you don't have to use those formulas; just use those plants.
Yeah.
But basically, that's the technique for the contagious mastitis, is to do a lot of immune support and a lot of antibiotic herbs. And if it is a contagious mastitis, be really careful how you milk that cow so you don't give it to the rest of the girls, or get rid of her, sell her, do something else with her.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the deal on mastitis. That's goats, sheep, cows, any of rabbits.
Across the board.
Your cat, your dog.
Yep. Makes sense. Okay. Excellent. Okay. I'm curious about some chicken ideas, because I will be the first to confess, I don't really doctor chickens. And if something happens to a chicken, it's just like, sorry, buddy. I don't know what to do with you. There are no vets in our area that do anything with chickens. If I called our local vet and asked about a chicken, they'd laugh. Give me some ideas of maybe some common chicken ailments and how we may be able to help them with herbs, because I'm really bad at this.
Yeah. Well, there's a long history of herb use with chickens. I mean, we've got Colonel Sanders, we've got shake and bake.
There you go. They go together so well. I know.
If what you're doing doesn't work, you can use those other
There's
herbs.
a backup plan.
So with chickens, the biggest thing with chickens is probably respiratory viruses. That's what knocks out most of them.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we have some herbs that are really great at knocking out respiratory viruses. And again, basically with any infection, the way I'm going to approach it is I'm going to do immune stimulation and I'm going to do antimicrobial herbs. So if it's a bug, I'm going to use antibiotic herbs if it's a bacterial infection. If it's a virus, I'm going to use antiviral herbs with my immune stimulation.
Sure.
Okay. And so, the same things, what do you do with your kids when they're getting a respiratory infection? You give them elderberries, right?
Mm-hmm.
You give them immune stimulating herbs like elder's immune stimulating too, but echinacea, astragalus, olive leaf, all those things are good immune stimulants, and a dozen others. Elderberry's good. Mullein leaf actually has some really remarkable antiviral effects. Everybody talks about it being a good cough suppressant and a pretty good expectorant, but it also coincidentally has some very specific activity against coronaviruses and influenza viruses.
Interesting.
It's almost like God knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And so
fascinating.
mullein leaf's great. Pine needle, also very effective for knocking out respiratory and coronaviruses. It inhibits attachment to the viruses, inhibits replication of the viruses. Basically the same herbs you would use for respiratory stuff for a human.
Okay.
And so with chickens, what I do is if they're eating a grain feed, I spray it with a little water bottle to make it sticky, and then I throw the powder in it so the powder sticks to the herbs.
That's smart.
so the powder sticks to the feed. Yeah. That's handy.
Okay.
I don't love, people always say, well, can you just put it in the water? And I say, sure. But if it doesn't taste good, they're not going to drink the water.
Right.
And if they're sick and not drinking the water, now you really got trouble. And so I prefer to put it on the feed, top dress the feed. Not that chickens are great at tasting things anyway. Their liquors aren't super advanced.
Sure. Okay.
But that's what I do. Or you can use fresh herbs. Chickens will always go for that too.
Yeah.
Especially if they don't have access to pasture and stuff. If you throw anything green in a chicken pen, they're going to eat it.
Yeah.
So you can do that. And like I said, the margins of safety are very wide.
Okay.
So we don't worry too much. Same thing with goats and horses and cows. Fresh herbs are great. If they don't want to eat the fresh herbs, if it's a cow or a horse, another trick for getting herbs into them is you can take an apple and core it and pack the powdered herbs in there and hand it to them.
Ooh,
wolf that down.
That's smart. Okay. Yep.
So that's a trick for the big guys.
Yeah.
And it's good if you've trained them to do that. If you go out there twice a week with a few apples and they come running because they see mom with the apple bucket.
Yeah.
Then that's a nice way to sneak herbs in. You can also mix it with for horses and cows, you can mix it with some molasses, the powder, and syringe it into them or something, or mix it with the feed.
Okay.
But yeah, respiratory stuff, again, with chickens, immune stimulating stuff, antiviral stuff. There's a formula on the website. There's that immunity support formula. And I'm not, pushing the formulas. You can just look at them and use those herbs.
Sure.
But,
sure.
Those herbs are great. There's a formula called SHOOFLOO, SHOOFLOO, because those aren't words.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I know that game.
Look at that one. That's a good antiviral formula. But antiviral formula for respiratory stuff. But that's what I do, and they work great. It's the same stuff I'm using on people.
Okay.
But so for chickens, horses, goats, one thing to be aware of that's a little bit important for goats is if you're giving herbs to goats, you have to be careful because they'll chase you and knock you down for seconds. They really like
right.
herbs.
That is a good. Thank you for that warning. That is a very true danger with the goat population.
Oh, those are the best weeds I ever had.
Exactly. More. Yeah. Oh, goats. Freaking goats. Okay. So now I feel empowered that next time I have a sick chicken, I may actually try some things instead of letting nature take its course.
And if it's really, really sick, you can use tinctures on them. And a tincture dose for a chicken's 3 drops.
Sure.
They're just little bitty guys. 3 to 5. But honestly, just putting a little moisture on that grain and then throwing the powder on so it kind of sticks is a good way to get it into them.
Yeah.
If they're
that's a great idea. Okay. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get ready.
Plants.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a lot, and we have a lot of mullein here. And so I'm just going to go get some of that and grab that.
And that's another really smart thing is to have a lot of stuff around.
Yes.
I mean, grow your own stuff. That's another thing I really push a lot in the school is learn to grow these plants and have them around so that you have things on hand.
Yes.
And you can just grab a handful of mullein and throw it to them. You can grab a handful of this and throw it to them.
Yep.
That's really valuable too.
Do you like to grow most of your own? Are you buying them? Or if you do buy them, do you have a favorite source?
Well, we try and grow as much stuff as we can as a business, and I really can't dig enough burdock to keep up with how much burdock I sell. That's not going to happen.
Right.
And so we're really careful to only buy stuff from, people we trust. But growing your own, if you're a real person not running a business, growing your own is absolutely the way to go. I mean, we had, so just as an example, on our little place, and I've moved since, but the house that I was in before, it was a 2-acre property, right? One of those acres was my house and the vet clinic and a parking lot, and the other acre I wasn't really using at all. It was just wild. And so I would say maybe a 1/4 acre of stuff that I was seriously growing things. And we had over 150 species of medicinals on that property.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And the reason was that every branch, every tree, every bush, every flower, everything on that place was a medicinal plant. All of our landscaping was medicinal plants.
Yeah.
And it looked just as pretty as anybody else's place.
Sure.
But it was all medicinal stuff, and so, even the trees and stuff, all medicinal stuff. And so you can have way more medicinals on your place than you think. You don't have to have a 1/2 acre big garden. Put them in your flower beds. Have your pretty shrub next to your front door be a medicinal. So that you have all those resources. And then, whenever I had 15 kids. 11 of them were adopted. But
wow, that's amazing.
People always ask if we had a TV set, but
yeah, I know. All those questions.
Only 4 were homemade.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, but when my kids were sick, they'd go out to the garden and grab something.
Yes.
That's how it worked. And if you got stung by a bee, you went out and grabbed some plantain and chewed it up and put it on the bee sting.
Yep.
If you had a bellyache, you went out and grabbed a handful of parsley and ate the parsley. They knew what to do. And it was just sort of an organic part of how our life was, and if it was winter, they'd go to the herb cupboard and grab the powder and throw it in their juice and choke it down, or they'd take a tincture, and so just having stuff on hand is really, really, really beneficial.
I agree. Because I think the worst feeling is when, I know for me, I'll do a little research, like I'll need an herb for something, I'll do a little research, figure out what I need, and then I'm like, I have to either drive to town, I have to wait for it to get shipped here, and then by then I forget or lose interest or whatever. So I agree that having that baseline. Speaking of baseline, I know there's so many options, and this might be a really hard question, but for someone just starting out who's maybe overwhelmed by all the options for themselves or for their animals, if you could pick 5 herbs to have as like your foundational medicine cabinet, what would you pick?
So I've been asked that question so many times, and there's 84 plants on that list.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Absolutely have to have.
Yes. I had a feeling you might say that. Or it depends.
But no, 5 is great.
Okay,
you really can. If you really knew, I tell people, if you really, really knew 10 plants, you could solve most of the stuff that's going to happen in your family.
Okay.
Really. So 5 herbs, let's see, for veterinary stuff, because we're talking about veterinary
let's talk about vet. Yep.
I would have comfrey, because I've used comfrey on all kinds of really horrific wounds in veterinary cases. Horses that do horrible things to themselves.
Horses always do horrible things to themselves.
Dumb things to themselves.
Yep.
Yeah, nobody can hurt themselves like a horse.
That is so true.
Comfrey's phenomenal for healing wounds, topically and internally. So I'd have comfrey. I would have calendula. That's really easy to grow. Oh, and by the way, on the comfrey, get the Russian comfrey. Sometimes they call it Bocking 14, Bocking 14. It's a sterile hybrid And so it can't reproduce by seed. And so if you buy regular comfrey and plant it,
is it like mint?
You're going to be up to your waist in comfrey everywhere in a year.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah. So get the Russian comfrey.
Okay.
Anyway, comfrey's great for healing wounds. Calendula is great for a lot of things. It's antibiotic. It has some specific antiviral properties for herpes viruses. So it's good for cold sores and shingles and chickenpox and things. It's anti-inflammatory, really great plant. So calendula is good. And the flower is the medicine. So, you easy to harvest. I would have an elderberry bush.
Yes.
For my respiratory stuff. I would have mullein. How many is that? 4?
That's 4, yep.
What else would I want? I would have, I would get a good antispasmodic. So maybe some angelica seed or cramp bark.
Okay.
For your scours things.
Yep.
And every other, and asthma and muscle back spasms and everything else. Mulleine's also a good expectorant. We talked about mullein.
Yes.
For respiratory stuff. Anyway, there's 5. That's easy.
That's good. Okay. Those are good.
I've got, just as a shameless commercial announcement, I've got 2 books that I've written.
Oh, good.
One's called The Homegrown Herbalist.
Okay.
And that's got about 30 plants. And to get in that book, they had to be really easy to grow anywhere. And good looking, most of them.
Nice. That's a bonus.
Yeah. So that's 30 you can pick from. And then the other book is The Homegrown Herbalist Guide to Medicinal Weeds.
Ooh.
And so even if you only plant 5, I promise you have 15 other really good ones in your yard.
Yes.
So look at those 2 as resources for plants that you might prioritize.
Excellent. I mean, we'll put those in the show notes, guys, because I'm all the whole foraging the weed thing is a whole nother fascination of mine. What can you use in your local area? I think that's such a cool library of knowledge to build.
We can do one on that some other day when we have an hour.
We totally should do. Yeah, you're definitely going to have to come back. I hope you've realized that by now. This is not our only conversation.
Weeds are fun. Yeah.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, it's very, very empowering. You think about it. If you can walk past a vacant lot full of weeds and see 10 edibles and 15 medicinals.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
That's life-changing.
It is.
If you really needed some stuff. So.
Yeah. Every time I learn, you just get to know our native plants, even if I don't always know what they're for yet, just like learning their names is such a powerful experience. Just like, because it's so easy to blank that out. We just don't pay attention. And you can live in an area for decades and be like, no idea what you're walking on or walking near.
Exactly.
So I just like, hey, I know your name now. Nice to meet you. It just is cool. It feels right. It feels right. Yeah. So we are running up on time. So as we close, and we really could talk for very much longer, so you will have to come back. I'd love to know your favorite veterinary herbal success story. Do you have one where you're just like, you loved what happened with the result of the treatment?
Some of the most dramatic cases I've done are wound cases. Those are the most fun because they're so, but we had just as an example, a really amazing story that we had. I had a dog years and years and years ago named Max. And Max was a Labrador retriever. And I don't know if you know this about Labradors, but they don't actually sleep at night. They actually lay there and think, what dumb thing could I do tomorrow?
Yes. Amen. Yep.
Anyway, Max was in the back of a pickup, tied up, which is really important. That's a good idea to tie up your dog.
Yeah. Oof.
But he had too much rope, which is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And so he went over the side, got tangled up with the back tire, and it took off all the flesh off his back leg and about a quarter of the bone. I mean, he had exposed bone marrow. The owner was drunk, went home, saw what kind of shape he was in, and went on a 3-day drinking binge. So I got the dog 4 days in. It was actually the guy's sister that brought him in. And he's got a fever of 106 or so, which is, that close to where your brain starts to melt.
Yes.
Which is very hard to assess in a Labrador retriever.
I'm sure.
I mean, if your schnauzer's brain melts, you can tell.
You're going to offend all the lab owners here. I'm going to get emails over this. We like labs, y'all.
I love labs.
Here's our official statement. We like labs. Okay, continue.
I do like labs. Anyway, super high fever, almost catatonic. I mean, almost not responsive. But I pinched his toe and he pulled his leg back. And I said, okay, if you know you have a foot, you can keep it. Otherwise, I just cut it off.
Yeah.
And I did herbs on him. And, well, first of all, I put him on a big gun antibiotic because he's got sepsis and osteomyelitis. I mean, he's going to die. The antibiotics did nothing. Next day, I put him on another big gun antibiotic, IV, nothing. And I'm thinking, holy cow, how come these antibiotics aren't getting into this infected bone marrow?
Yeah.
And the little voice in my head says, because all the circulation of that bone marrow is out on the tire. There's no circulation into that bone. And so I said, I got to start thinking like an herbalist. And I got some calendula and some golden seal powdered herb, mixed it with some water, made a paste, and smeared it into that open bone marrow. Gave him a big dose of echinacea. And 12 hours later, his fever's gone. He wants something to eat.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the rest of the wound management was comfrey and, things like that to accelerate the healing. But I got an email about 12 years later with a picture of Max with his old gray muzzle, just saying, hey, we just wanted to let you know old Max passed away. He ran on that leg all day, every day, chasing rainbows, happy as a clam, and we'd adopted him out to somebody else.
Yeah.
But, I've had a lot of cases like that. If you want to see some fun, and with humans too, some really graphic, horrible wound cases. If you want to see some fun cases, go to the website, go to homegrownherbalist.net and go to the blog and do a search for wound or something, and you'll find there's all kinds of wound cases. And I show the progression, over the time period. But we've had a lot of those are the most fun cases because they're so dramatic.
You can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I've also had a lot of cases of, fevers that weren't responsive to antibiotics, gut problems. I mean, you do it all day, every day, and you see a lot of cool stuff. But But the wounds look the coolest in the blog article.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about the blog article. It's the internet age.
That's right.
It's all the visuals. I know I said that was my last question. I lied. I have one more selfish question that when you were talking about wounds, what would you suggest for proud flesh in horses? Would you go for comfrey in that situation?
So comfrey accelerates cell division. So on a proud flesh on a horses, you'd want to first have a vet come out and cut that off.
Okay.
And then if you use comfrey, it'll heal it over. But you want to get rid of the naughty stuff before you start.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Make it a clean wound again. And then, absolutely.
Okay.
And we have, again, wound management. That's something else we could talk about all day, but I have a formula called Poultice, but the big rock star in that is comfrey, but it's got some calendula for an antibiotic. It's got a little cayenne to stimulate things.
Yes.
It's got some plantain for pulling toxins and junk out of the wound, but it's mostly comfrey,
Okay.
But really, really a phenomenal plant for healing stuff up.
Yes.
Don't use it on puncture wounds. That's the only caveat.
Because it will close over too fast?
Yeah. Close over too fast. Now you got an abscess.
Yep.
But any other kind of wound, comfrey's my first grab.
Okay. Good to know. I'm going to plant some. I think I can grow it here. I'll figure it out. So, this was so enlightening. Thank you for your time so very much. And I will have you back if you're willing. Sure. I'm going to give you the shout out for your website. Let me know if I said it wrong. Homegrownherbalist.net. Everyone go check out the website. There's a ton of information there. There's also information about the Homegrown Herbalist School. And then the 2 books, Homegrown Herbalist, the book, and then Homegrown Herbalist Medicinal Weeds. Did I get those right?
Yep. Guide to Medicinal Weeds.
Guide to Medicinal Weeds.
Yeah,
all right.
Both those books are on the site. So,
awesome. Any other resources or you want people to check out in particular? Or are those the main ones?
No, that'll keep them busy. Go look at the blog.
Yes, and the blog.
We also have a YouTube a YouTube channel.
With videos,
and there's videos on it,
which
is good. Not everybody's YouTube has a channel that has videos. On YouTube, it's just Homegrown Herbalist. So if you do a search for Homegrown Herbalist, you'll find a lot of. There's a bazillion plant videos and all kinds of other things.
Awesome.
That are fun.
Sweet. All right. You did a good job keeping your branding cohesive so we can remember that and be able to find you everywhere. So, all righty. Well, thank you again for your time. I can't wait to publish this and let everyone listen in because I know they're going to get a ton of good stuff out of it. So I appreciate it.
It was delightful to visit with you. Thanks for having me.